So as I was saying, I don't have incense with me right now, but we will go ahead and give our little introduction. So let me begin with this little reading, and then we will check in. All right. So from Jerry Bowes, call forth your lover. Your lover brings optimism, enthusiasm, enjoyment, and play. At his core, he is connection and appreciation. We love and delight that which connects us to nature, beauty, fun, and other living beings. We are saddened by that which disconnects us from them. Our mourning is about the loss of the connection and pleasure we received from it. Welcome your lover as your ally today. Oh.
Oh.
So my question for our reflection today is, where in your life do you seek connectedness without boundaries? Where in your life do you seek connectedness without boundaries? So sit with that question for a second. And now I ask that we all check in briefly with your name, where you're calling from, your primary feeling you're experiencing right now, and no more than a sentence to identify an aspect of yourself where you identify lover energy as you understand it now. So let's see, let's go in. Oh, you're in different orders now. Hey, Stavros, would you begin?
Sure. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Stavros, Global Radiant Owl. And I'm checking in feeling checking in feeling vulnerable, emotional, sleep deprived. And the lover aspect of me is most evident in my developing an ongoing power of forgiveness as the baseline of my being.
Oh,
and I'm in.
All right. Michael Kensing.
Hello, man. Mike Kensing, I'm fierce, kind deer. Just glad to be here. Feeling a little harried. Got taxes stuff submitted, which is a little under the wire here. I've been trying to get my mission together, and my missions really seem to be consistent with this lover. Like I am willing and able to have this transparency of spirit and heart. And in the people that I love, people in my life, seems to be a blessing to them. The fact that I can be just honest and real and show my heart, show my feelings. I've always kind of thought I had a strong lover. One thing, Daniel, I have the wood from my pit.
Oh.
Actually, Josh Rask gave me, and I could use it. It's kind of like an incense thing. We're past that now, so.
Oh, thank you very much.
So with that,
that's very cool. Jacob.
Welcome. Hi, everyone. I'm Jacob, checking in with Joy. I'm very happy to be here. I love this call. I feel like the answer to the question is I sort of do that almost anywhere and any time. Like, how do I try to seek connection without boundary? Like, the only reason I push people's boundaries is to try to get to know them better and open them up. And I don't push people for other, perhaps self-manipulative reasons. I really just want to make connections with people. And so willing to do almost anything to do that. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it's been a driving thing throughout my life, is challenging people to make connection. With that, I'm in.
Oh,
Oh,
and David?
can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is this any better?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'll try to speak up a little louder. The aspect of the lover in me that I'm connected with now is the piece of me that really appreciates the opportunities I have to connect with people who are different from me. I have a wonderful men's group every Monday night, a very diverse group of folks who are really invested in connecting with each other, helping each other, supporting each other. I really love being in an environment like that. Going to do one of the Mankind Project's weekends here next weekend that's specifically GBTQ oriented, or GBTQ Gateway. Really excited about connecting with folks from all over the country. We want to provide an opportunity for gay, bi, trans, and queer men to stand up and stand out and speak up and speak out about who they are. Amen.
Oh,
Oh,
and I'm Daniel Schlorff, feeling happy, feeling some relief, feeling energized by this, and you all being committed to this work and being here with me. There's a little anecdote that I've used before about where I've seen lover in my life, and that is when I gave communion to a woman who had not been allowed to have communion in her tradition because she had a child out of wedlock. And it had been decades since she has had communion. And the time I gave her communion, I visited with her several times. And the time I gave her communion was the last time I saw her awake. She was a hospice patient. She was at least in her 80s. And, the next couple of visits, she was unconscious. And so, just that lover in me recognizing that something needed to be done for her to receive grace and I dare say mercy at the end of life. And she was able to, I think, experience that before her ultimate end of life. So that was pushing beyond boundaries for me. And that was connection. So I'd love to begin.
question?
Sure, Stavros.
I'm a little confused. It seemed to me that two questions were asked at the same time.
Yes.
And I'm feeling unhappy because
you answered one of them.
Yeah. The question was, where's the lover in my life? And then the other question was our outer boundaries, our inner or outer boundaries.
Yeah.
Which I thought was going to be answered separately.
I see. Well, here's how I viewed it, if you don't mind me. And I'd love to hear your answer to both questions if you are willing to share. Mm-hmm. The first one was, a sensei question, just a question for our reflection. And the second question could be answered in light of the sensei question, as we have during normal lover rounds. But if you have something you'd be willing to share, I'd love to hear it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Because the outer, where is, as I remember it, the question was, where do you find the outer boundaries, or without limit?
Where in your life do you see connectedness without boundaries?
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Yeah, the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Simple as that. And where everyone is holy, and that there is the self with a capital S, then there's their behavior. And my work is to not react to people's behavior, and to connect with the Holy Spirit that is not within them, but we are all part of. So and that is the awe that that I surrender to. And and your story was very moving, and I really would like to and I think you'll agree with me, but I think one of the our language is so limited because you didn't do anything for that woman.
Right.
You didn't do anything for that woman. You did not need to do anything. All that you were facilitating or helping was to share the Holy Spirit.
That's right.
You didn't bring the Holy Spirit to her. You didn't. So it was always around her.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a matter of you help clearing some obstacles for herself.
Yeah. Where she had experienced an obstacle with her tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Her
perception, yes.
Yeah. What I did, I feel, was I said, it's already within you,
mm-hmm.
and come and receive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's a really good point. Thank you very much for mentioning that.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone else have any thoughts they'd like to share before we move on to our first reading?
Yeah, I'd like to share one thing.
Sure, Jacob.
It has to do with that the only time I'm ever pressed to take action is when I'm in the service of making connection. And so I don't know if that has to do with the warrior in me or my mission, but I've just noticed that the times I'm most motivated are when I'm inspired to help someone or to build a bridge or to help them expand beyond their boundaries.
Okay. And certainly, warrior, magician, king, lover, none of these operate within isolation because all of these are found within us, right? And it's just the different kinds of energies. And some people are very energized by lover energy, and it sounds like you are too. And your lover may, in fact, motivate your warrior into action.
Yeah.
We'll hear a little about lover inspiring warrior a little later, but on the shadow side. Did you have something else?
Yeah. Would you mind repeating once again what is the project you're doing, or at least in very brief?
Sure. I'm completing the Doctor of Ministry at the Pacific School of Religion with a certificate in sexuality and religion. The focus of my doctoral work is gender and sexuality. And I'm using Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette's King, Warrior, Magician, Lover as kind of a framework for talking about gender and sexuality, mostly gender, actually, as it pertains to the cultivation of a deeper spirituality. And also what I'm doing is creating, I guess, an update for this 30-year-old project. Because we talked about Me Too before, we'll talk about gun reform today. We've talked about Black Lives Matter. We've talked about Occupy Wall Street, if you remember that. We've talked about things that weren't possibly on the minds of Moore and Gillette 30 years ago. New ethical deliberations that challenge their writing. And I'm creating a bridge for, I guess, modern readers. I hope, if I'm doing it right, I'm hoping to create a bridge for the contemporary reader. So it's a two-pronged effort. One, to partially fulfill the requirements for the Doctor of Ministry project and dissertation, and the other to help provide another tool of reflection for Mankind Project and other men's work. Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you. Thanks for asking. Yeah. All right. Well, if you have your book, if you have a book, I know Jacob does now. Yay. Turn to page 122. If you have this, if you all have the same edition, it looks like you have the same edition. And look in the middle of the page. It says along with sensitivity. And would someone volunteer to read those two paragraphs ending with experience in its totality? Is there a volunteer?
I can read.
All right, Michael.
I'm sorry, how far down?
Just those two paragraphs, along with sensitivity and ending with sensual experience in its totality.
Okay. Along with sensitivity to all inner and outer things comes passion. The lover's connectedness is not primarily intellectual, it is through feeling. The primal hungers are felt passionately in all of us, at least beneath the surface. But the lover knows us with a deep knowing. Being close to the unconscious means close to the fire of life and on the biological level, to the fires of the life-engendering metabolic processes. Love, as we know, is hot, often too hot to handle. The man under the influence of a lover wants to touch and be touched. He wants to touch everything physically and emotionally, and he wants to be touched by everything. He recognizes no boundaries. He wants to live out the connectedness he feels with the world inside, in the context of his powerful feelings, and outside, in the context of his relations with other people. Ultimately, he wants to experience the world of sensual experience in its totality.
Okay. So a question for potential discussion is, where in your life are you a feeler and one who connects? And where in your life have you turned off feeling and have closed off connection? Could be in our primary relationships. It could be in other kinds of relationships where we have really turned on the feeling and have experienced that too hot to handle kind of feeling. Or, you know, perhaps we've closed off connection. We don't want to feel something. Perhaps someone died in our life, like our mothers or our siblings or our grandparents or someone close, and we don't want to deal with it yet, or we're unable to deal with it. So where in your life are you a feeler or not a feeler? Go ahead, Mike.
It's interesting when you first brought up the question before about pushing the limits and getting in touch with this. The one thing I realized that in an area of my life around my sexuality, there are times I push the limit around my sexuality and around my sexual connection with other men. I push that to the limit at times. So I was thinking about that in terms of pushing beyond what is so-called, I hate to use the word even normal, but it's just, I immediately thought of that when you said that. That primal, there's some primal thing about it. But in terms of feelings, I think I've been willing to go to the deeper depths within myself to try to work through areas around grief, my shame, around my rage and anger since my weekend. The areas that I am very protected and very hard to go there again is around the desire to love in a deeper, more relational, like one-on-one, very protected, very guarded, very closed to that. So anyway, that I'm in.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Well, on page 125, I'll read just a paragraph and then we'll move on to the next thing. I think Michael answered the question really well. And
Hopefully I wasn't too shocking to anybody. I hope not.
no,
Something
no.
I wanted to share.
Oh, sure,
is that
Jacob.
I think it's funny the words that they choose to use. They say the fires of the life engendering metabolic processes. I've never heard anyone use that language, but it's funny. They're like being somewhat poetic, it's somewhat scientific, somewhat politically correct.
Yeah.
A question I had before is when you said that you're doing an update, you're pushing the boundaries on what Moore and Gillette were doing.
Not necessarily pushing the boundaries, but go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. This might be a longer, more extended discussion for another time, but do you believe that they had a bias as Eurocentric or Caucasian-centric, since both of them came from that?
Yeah, I mean, we see that clearly in this chapter, where in the conclusion chapter also, where they talk about, well, this needs to be a priority for the Western man, and they talk about individualism being, like a preeminent value and everything. So yes, you caught that, and that's absolutely right. They're taking, and in contrast, they're taking all of these like Hindu and Muslim and all of these not far-fetched, but like
Traditions from around the world, far-flung
things, to give examples, but then they're bringing it back to the Western reader, which I think is they knew their audience,
But I also think they were in a time right as the internet was starting to come up, right? Yeah. So they were still living in the 60s, 70s, 80s, beginning of the 90s, like provincial thought processes, rather than today where everyone's interconnected through the internet and everyone's interconnected through the global consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the sensitivity is much higher around that today than it ever was.
Yeah, absolutely. So you caught that, and that's spot on, that they are in fact geared towards the Western thought. And a lot of that is because that's their training. Gillette is a minister, and Robert Moore being a Jungian and Adlerian diplomat. And
what diplomat?
He's a Jungian analyst, or wasn't Jungian analyst, as well as a diplomat in
what's that term mean, a diplomat?
Graduate, or it's not a degree, it's a certification or a qualification, like in the psychology of Adler. So basically he has his PhD and his Jungian degree and his Adlerian degree. He was a very educated man, pulling from various different streams of knowledge, which I think makes this all the more an incredible writing. Yeah,
makes it juicy.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
But there is a premium on the individuality.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really. A quick question, and I want to digress. I don't want to hijack the thing, but from a historical point of view, I heard an interesting position presented once, where if you look at the way in our country today, how we have conservative forces, and we have liberal forces trying to gain the attention of everyone and gain the membership of a way of thinking, to pull the population one direction or the other.
Mm-hmm.
That the Renaissance was. I read listened to someone on a podcast make the argument that the Renaissance was such a thing, where the whole idea of individuality was a political action, not some sort of like evolutionary blossoming of the person, but it was actually a movement to pull power from the church. And I thought it was an interesting way of seeing something that we revere. I mean, I revere the Renaissance as being so great, but there are actually other motivations behind it. And like so much the same way that we can actually look at our history of the founding fathers with its idolatry, when actually they were architects of power. Trying to cash in on all this territory and kick out.
Right.
So it's really I don't think it's cynical, but it's really a balanced way of looking at it all. And and looking at Moore and Gillette, in that they have a bias towards promoting individuality.
Yeah.
And that we're all captains of our own ship. So we're busy, building our ship, a really secure vessel, and we need a greater contemplation of the ocean that we're in, more than the ship that we're building.
Were you, however, arguing that these days were more collectivist and populist? Is that where you were starting from?
No, I'm starting that. Well, I think that I was starting from that. What struck me as just their bias towards individuality.
I see. Okay.
Which in my bias means separateness.
Sure.
And it's easy to conflate the two in reading this.
Okay.
To see us as separate pyramids, separate floating pyramids in this, in this ocean. So that's my,
got it.
Emotional and mental reaction to it.
Okay. Jacob, did you have another thing?
Yeah, I just got a hit. The warrior sets boundaries, but the lover sort of breaks or transcends them. So I was just thinking about this conference call, perhaps, and it's not a judgment, it's just my observation that we're very flowing, very going from topic to topic. But if someone was a very strong warrior, they would kind of, even if they were in a loving way, they would say, all right, we're on this topic right now. And that would be the warrior's mode, in my opinion. And this is just an observation. However, I grew up in a lover household where it was like, everything is always flowing. There was definitely a Darth of warrior energy in my upbringing. So I just noticed that now it's like we're very lover in our streams of consciousness, and then maybe in the schoolroom or in the university, there's a warrior. All right, we're talking about this now.
Yeah. I can think of certain individuals in MKP who would really enforce those boundaries, and perhaps, just maybe perhaps, your instructor this morning is trying to model good lover energy as well. So maybe that was a subconscious thought. To give myself credit where credit is not due. I want to close this section with a reading page 125. There's one paragraph that I want to read. The lover is not, then, the only archetype of the joy of life. In his capacity to feel at one with others and with the world, he must also feel their pain. Other people may be able to avoid pain, but the man in touch with the lover must endure it. He feels the painfulness of being alive, both for himself and others. So I wanted to underscore, feeling not and connectedness, not just being a positive thing where we're joyous together, and sometimes compassion, sometimes empathy, sometimes all these turn toward painfulness, like the loss I mentioned earlier of our mothers or our siblings or our grandparents or someone else we're close to. So lover, let's not overly romanticize lover, because lover can lead to many hardships. Like Michael was talking about earlier, having to process some grief, that can be lover as well. Well,
which page did you just read from?
125. Yeah.
Okay.
So now that we've heard that lover energy is all about connection, let's take a moment and think of all the people in our lives that have been present with us during joy and sadness and the good and the bad in our lives. Just take a moment and think about those individual faces. We don't have to call in their name right now, but call in silently those individuals. And be grateful for their presence in your lives, whether past or present. And continuing on page 125, can someone read the last full paragraph of 125?
I can do it.
All right, go ahead.
The man under the influence of the lover does not.
Sorry. The last full paragraph is we all know
that love brings both pain and joy. Our realization that this is profoundly and unalterably true is archetypally based. Paul, in his famous Hymn to Love, which proclaims that the characteristics of authentic love, says that love bears all things and endures all things. And so it does. The troubadours of the late Middle Ages in Europe sang of the exquisite pain of love that simply is an inescapable part of its power.
Okay. So that's kind of in the middle of a thought. Let's see. Just to put a comma there, I wanted to say without the lover, there would be very few bonds in this world. A lot of the bonds would be superficial or even political. Imagine what it would be like to live in a world where all relationships were wheel and deal kind of associations. Like, think of the political wheeling and dealing that happens, and think of, like, what if everyone just used one another in an objective kind of way, an objectification, rather than being subject to one another, to take us from Christianity into Buber, a Jewish philosopher, talking about I and thou, the relational energies between two individuals, fully recognizing one another, like, the word namaste. The divinity in me or the light in me recognizes the divinity or light in you. So lover, then, is what brings authenticity and longing and true feeling to the equation. Lover is also about transgressing artificial boundaries in service of that authenticity and longing and true feeling. So now we can continue with the next two paragraphs. And Jacob, would you read those as well?
The man under the influence of the lover does not want to stop at socially created boundaries. He stands against the artificiality of such things. His life is often unconventional and messy. The artist's studio, the creative scholar's study, the go-for-it boss's desk. Consequently, because he is opposed to law in this broad sense, we see enacted in his life of confrontation with the conventional, the old tension between sensuality and morality, between love and duty, between, as Joseph Campbell poetically describes it, amor and Roma. Amor stands for passionate experience, and Roma stands for duty and responsibility to law and order. The lover energy is thus utterly opposed, at least at first glance, to the other energies of the mature masculine. His interests are the opposite of the warrior's, the magician's, and the king's concerns for boundaries, containment, order, and discipline. What is true within each man's psyche is true in the panorama of history and cultures as well.
So what they do is open up at least three different topics that we could talk about. The lover confronting convention, the conflict between sensuality and morality, or, you know, going along with my studies, sexuality and religion, perhaps, and the conflict between love and duty. And we could write paragraphs on each of these topics. But is there one that rises to the top for you that you'd like to talk about now? And we can just kind of play it by ear for the next few minutes. Yeah, Mike?
I don't know, just maybe I shouldn't go there, but for myself, sexuality and religion in my journey are huge areas that are interrelated in my life. And so I don't know how, you know, how that strikes everyone else, but that's very powerful two areas.
Yeah. I think with the creation of any purity codes, whether the Code of Manu or Levitical law, or, you know, here I feel like I'm being like, you know, talking about all these far-flung things, or, you know, Pauline kinds of constructions of what true and natural sexuality look like, you know, it's been damaging. It's hurt a lot of people, and people just follow it, you know, blindly, as a warrior, as a king even, and they turn off their magician, their thinking, and they put a wall up between their body and spirit, between their feeling and what they know to be true, and what their religion tells them they need to do. Whatever religion we're talking about, because there are a lot of justifications for instance, homophobia or transphobia, or even, you know, purity codes that prohibit polygamy. We can think of all sorts of different ways that purity codes have been implemented. And so what they're saying is that sensuality wins with the lover. Morality doesn't even come into question. The false boundaries that the warrior has implemented, or the king has implemented, and the warrior reinforces, all of that falls to the wayside because the lover pushes right through.
Daniel?
Yeah.
When you use the term sensuality, I'm not sure, what does that mean? Sensuality, is that sexuality? Is that?
It includes sexuality, I would argue, but, you know, our smelling, our tasting, our touching, our I forgot what all the senses are, but, you know, I've lost my senses.
Don't worry, senses have no sense.
That's right. Yeah. I'm incensed.
The definition I've heard for the difference between sexuality and sensuality is that sexuality is sort of a desire. It's like, I see that person and I want them, or I see that experience and I want that. It's like a longing, a lusting, like a drive. And sensuality is the moment, this is what I've heard, being in the moment where it's just pure feeling. I'm touching them, they're touching me, that it's a sensual experience. I'm experiencing what it's like to be in the moment. So one is more like the projected image and the other is the image itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true in as it relates to sexuality, to sex and everything, but there are other forms of being sensual. And, you know, it's not just about sex, for instance, because Levitical law also says, you know, don't wear certain things, and don't eat certain things. And so they're preventing certain senses from being fully engaged.
Yeah, I think maybe the difference between lust and love is a good analog that, like, let's say you're talking about the rules of eating or something, or I'm really in a state of desire toward having that fur coat, and so I just want it so badly. And if I'm in a state of desire when I'm wearing the coat, I can't actually appreciate it. But if I'm wearing the coat and I'm feeling it, touching it, I'm in the sensual experience, I might be able to experience the sensual aspect of it. And so sexuality is actually a limited term, but it's more like the desiring, the love, the lusting, the, like, I just want that coat so bad because I believe that it will give me what I want.
Yeah, sure.
In terms of the lover and sensuality, there's a quote that I have here. We have seen that the body's sensory apparatus is specifically made to rest on externals. So I think the role of the lover, or the role of, in terms of the lover and sensuality, is to have experience the externals, but to have the deeper connection to spirit. There's something more unifying it, that it doesn't stop with the senses. It doesn't stop with the sensory experience.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And 2 sections from now, we're going to talk about that 6th sense. I remembered the other one is seeing, but there's that 6th sense. You know, if you remember the businessman who has hunches, that sort of yeah, that area. So you're absolutely right, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. So any other thoughts on the what we have been talking about, the sensuality and morality?
Hey, Daniel.
Yeah.
I think the reason I brought up the topic of sexuality and religion is that I grew up in a very strict Catholic home, Irish Catholic, where basically the mores around sexuality, masturbation, about being modest, about basically was to turn off feelings. They were all bad. They weren't good. And when I came into my own feelings around my sexuality, about being gay, because of my own conflict in my own belief in God, I went through some significant reparative therapy around my sexuality, which was incredibly damaging to me. This was in my late 30s. So that's why I brought that. That's a very strong, like it was like God was saying, Mike, for you to live an authentic life, you cannot live a gay life. You'll be in hell to pay, so to speak. So that's why that's such a strong, and thank God I moved away from that. But there's hurt there around sexuality and religion and God because of that.
And the question is, what moved you away from the doctrinaire and the legalistic? Could it have been the lover becoming stronger and stronger within you, and your connectedness to, I'm just a hypothetical.
No. Yeah, it's possible where I said, this is, if God is a compassionate, loving being, then I can't, this box that I've created is a no-win situation. There's got to be another way. Yeah. And so it's aligned with what you said. Moving towards compassion, acceptance. This is who I am. God must love me irregardless and no matter what. So yeah, that's true.
Good. And so it's your connection to your own sexuality and understanding of yourself, and it's your connection to God and God's connection to you, it sounds like also. So you learned deep within yourself that there wasn't a wall between you and God because of this sexuality, but perhaps
and it's still an ongoing thing. It's not. It's a daily. Still something I'm working on.
Yes. from what I hear, it's going to be a struggle for a long time for many people. Good. That was good. So I want to talk about the cultural background, and this gets into some religiousness also on page 126 to 127. The first 4 paragraphs of the section, cultural background, starts with in the history of our religions, and we'll read those 4 paragraphs that end with irrepressible passion. Do you see that? Would anyone like to read that? You will? Okay.
I'm just not sure where you said it finishes, Daniel.
It's 4 paragraphs, so irrepressible passion.
In the history of our religions and the cultures that flow from them, we can see this pattern of tension between the lover and the other archetypes of the mature masculine. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, what are called moral or ethical religions, have all persecuted the lover. Christianity has taught more or less consistently that the world, the very object of the lover's devotion, is evil, that the Lord of this world is Satan, and that is he who is the source of the sensuous pleasures, the foremost of which is sex, that Christians must avoid. The church has stood opposed to artists, innovators, and creators. In the late Roman period, when the church first gained power, one of the first things it did was close the theaters. Soon after, it closed the brothels and forbade the displaying of pornographic art. There was no room for the lover, not at least in his erotic expression. Following the ancient Hebrew practice, the church also persecuted psychics and mediums. People, along with artists and others, lived very close to the image-making unconscious, and hence, to the lover, here is a source of the witch burnings of the Middle Ages. Some of the witches, as far as the church was concerned, were not only psychic, that is, deeply intuitive and sensitive impressions from the inner world of nuanced feelings, but they were also nature worshippers. Because the church labeled the world of nature evil, the witches were believed to be worshippers of Satan, the lover. To this day, many Christians are still scandalized by the one truly erotic book in the Bible, the Song of Solomon. It is a series of love poems based on ancient Canaanite fertility rituals, and it is pornographic in the best sense of the word. It describes the amour, the physical and spiritual bonding between a man and a woman. The only way that these moralistic Christians can accept the Song of Solomon is by interpreting it as an allegory of Christ's love for the church. Archetypes cannot be banished or wished away. The lover crept back into Christianity in the form of Christian mysticism, through romantic and sentimental pictures of a sweet Jesus, meek and mild, and through the hymnal. If we think for a moment about the erotic undertones in hymns such as In the Garden, Love Lifted Me, and Jesus, Lover of My Soul, to mention just a few, we can see the lover colorly and essentially ascetic and moralistic religion with his irrepressible passion.
Thank you. So we see some of the historical examples of catastrophes that have happened when cultures and religions have tried to turn off the lover, even casting shame and moral judgment upon practitioners in touch with their lover. But rooted deep within the consciousness of humanity is a longing for connection and emotional expression. So, what are other examples we can generate in which segments of society have tried to police feeling and connectedness? So we've already talked about Christianity and perhaps other religions. I mentioned the Code of Manu in Hinduism, where the flesh is turned off, or the world is turned off, or feeling is turned off, or our intuitive nature is turned off. Where have we seen this before?
think not only with Christianity, but with specifically with Judaism and Islam, there are rules about women, the beautiful sex. They have to be covered, largely covered, so that the sensuality and the attraction and the distraction and so forth that they would naturally exert will not get the men off track. So we have to cover the women so the men don't attack them constantly out of lust.
Yeah. So we see examples in Judaism and Islam as well. Yeah. I was also thinking of the Stoics. There's a sense of, what is the word? Anematophobia. I had to look that one up. Fear of emotion. Fear of what emotion might be telling us or leading us off course. And of course, that was in reaction to the Epicureans, who were all about sensuality and what emotion can tell us about ourselves and of the world. So it was a reactivity to another philosophical movement.
Yeah, there's this.
To each other. Yeah, go ahead.
There's a Netflix documentary now about a guru called the Bhagwan, who's also called Osho, and I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's called Wild Wild Country. It mostly portrays him in a negative way, but I really dig his teachings. And one of the things he talks about is a new archetype for man called Zorba the Buddha. And Zorba is a Greek, either myth or a Greek character who delighted in all of the world's pleasures. Like, he would literally throw everything else under the bus if it meant indulging in some pleasure, like friendship, family, money, everything. And then the Buddha is considered to be the opposite, an ascetic, someone who's meditating in the mountains. But he said the new ideal for a man is somebody who, man in general, not just male, is someone who can both indulge in the pleasures of the world while at the same time knowing it's not the pleasures, like I can enjoy this world. It's like what Jesus said, being in this world but not of it, that I can enjoy this world in all of its aspects without getting attached to it. So you don't need to detach, so to speak, like many of the Buddhist monks who cloister themselves, or Christian monks, or Jewish people who cloister themselves off, make sure I never have to become tempted, or I'm going to detach from the world so the world will not own me. That's not really it. You're still actually attached, or by detaching, you're still letting the world own you, so to speak. So Osho's vision is somebody called Zorba the Buddha who can both enjoy in the delights of the world, but also recognize that it's not the world that's bringing me the pleasure, it's the light within me that's allowing me to enjoy. It's like, it's a balance.
Mm-hmm. That's a great example, with which I'm unfamiliar. Thanks for sharing that. That's a challenge too.
There's a book by Nikos Kazantzakis, Zorba the Greek.
Yeah, that's who it is.
Yeah.
Who was he?
Nikos Kazantzakis was a Greek author, very famous one, and that was one of his books called Zorba the Greek, about this really buttoned-up, repressed man meeting this guy full of life. It was made into a movie starring Anthony Quinn, which is very accessible. I mean, the book is really, really beautiful, and so if you want to follow it further.
Oh, great.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
It's interesting, Daniel, that you talk about different faith traditions and how some faith traditions are much more open, as Jacob was saying, much more open to the sensuality of the lover, and that others prefer to focus on other quadrants. It's interesting that when we look at those elements of organized religion that go the other direction, for example, to the more thoughtful or analytical approach that Jewish scholars or Muslim scholars would look at, or Christian scholars would look at the Bible for direction about life. It's interesting that it seems that by strictly using an intellectual approach, we start to lock up the lover. We start to turn that off, prohibit it, separate it, demonize it, it seems that those religions that do the most academic study end up being the most separated in this lover quadrant.
I think that's in large part true. In many cases, not in every case, of course, but in many cases. Stavros, did you have something to say? I have another thought.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it really seems to me between the lover, which the book ends on, which it seems like everyone identifies so strongly with, it wants the most discussion. The lover, I mean, it's a question of form and content, where the king and the warrior, and even the magician, deal with form and how to apply it. And the lover, as it sounds to me, is the one who's most spiritual, the one that's most connected to spirit, as something that is aesthetic, formless, and to gain access to it through the senses. I'm sorry I didn't go anywhere with that, but
I want to pick up from what you just said, because what you just said reminds me of a question I had earlier, which is there a hierarchy among the archetypes? Like, is one, I wouldn't say better, but is there a progression? Because it might actually be that I actually cannot break a boundary if I can't hold a boundary. So let's say I use your metaphor before of us being all ships in the ocean, right? We need to build our ship and make sure that our ship is solid, or else we're going to drown. But then we can move from ship to ship. So I actually believe the lover is the highest of the archetypes, and that without the king, without the magician, and without the warrior, you're not going to be able to access it.
Good point.
And maybe that's true for you, and maybe other people need another archetype to be preeminent in their life.
But that was the question I had. Is there, according to Moore and Gillette, or perhaps you, a hierarchy among them, or are they all considered to be equal and valid in their own way, none better or more achievable or more preferable than the other?
Let me say this. Without a mature king, without a mature warrior, without a mature magician, and without a mature lover, then we, as individuals, are stifled in our growth. These are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess my thought is, without love, what's the point of this whole ride?
Okay. Well, love is, I think, can be found in all four archetypes. So it's deceptive, the term lover, right? Because we think that's the only one that has love, but in reality, it's just, we're talking about feeling and connectivity and creativity and intuition, and
maybe we should call it the connector.
The connector. That's a good way for you to remember, I think, perhaps. Yeah. So does that speak to what you were asking?
Yeah, because I don't really believe there's a hierarchy, but maybe, like you said, love is within all the four, and this is the last of the series, and so maybe, I don't know if you'd want to consider doing a fifth that's like an overview of how they sort of merge and meld and stuff. But for me, what's the point of all this is like a question that's always lingering, because you said it stifles our growth as individuals. Is growth the quote-unquote end? or is the journey the end? Or like if a tree is growing, is there a point? Is there something it's getting to, or is the whole process of it being a seed to a sapling to a small tree to a big tree to its death, is that the point of just it being a tree?
That's covered in the last chapter, conclusion.
In the conclusion, that's
it's covered. It's covered. Well, it's not covered. It's not covered in a final way, but it addresses it in a way that it seems very clear to me. And I don't know if we should wait till we get to the conclusion, but
yeah, we're going to get to that. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if we don't, then just bring it up.
Yeah, I'll bring it up. On page 153, when it says admiring men, it talks about perfection as, being impossible, as completion.
Right.
And that, quote, movement towards wholeness is possible. However, and every man is individually responsible for it. So as I interpret it, it's just the movement is the essence of it all. That that there is no final arrival. And Milton Glaser, the graphic designer, once said that there's no such thing as art. There is only artist. So and so it's just that we're in an evolutionary process. I mean, we're in this form that we're in. So it's all movement, and so that's how I see the conclusion chapter addressing that.
While we're talking about the conclusion, there are two other points I wanted to make. Then we'll go back to Lover. Okay. On page 156 of conclusion, there's a sentence that says this, and this could even be a secondary thesis for the book, perhaps. The enemy of both, because it's repeated several times within the whole book. The enemy for both sexes is not the other sex, but infantile grandiosity and the splitting of the self that results from it. So that goes back to what Jacob was asking about. Is there a pecking order for these four archetypes, or what? And I was talking about how we're stifled in our growth if we don't cultivate, or if we don't incorporate these four archetypes in their maturity in our lives, right? There's another point, and I hate to end this on a negative note, but talking about if contemporary men can take the task of their own initiation from boyhood to manhood as seriously as did their tribal forebears, to me, all throughout the book, it seems there's a romanticization of romanticization of ancients, of so-called primitive non-Western cultures, perhaps not seeing them in their fullness, because some primitive cultures, we could use that word, some ancient cultures also didn't care about genocide or other things, and we as moderns hopefully have raised our awareness, as we're bombing Syria today, that genocide is not a good thing. So that's just two other points I wanted to bring up in conclusion. But so
nothing negative there, Daniel.
Nothing negative.
not to my ears. Well, not in your in your observation.
Yeah.
I mean, just that. In reading this book, books can become idols in themselves. Everyone holds books up like there's an idolatry of book. I read it in a book. You're like, all of a sudden,
Yeah.
I mean, so the book is a book written by two guys,
Yeah.
So it's, like the blind men describing the elephant,
Mhm.
it's, so look at it at that level. I mean, we easily, me easily doubts the historical value of the Bible I'm skeptical of the historical value of it, its historical accuracy. So, in this book also, deserves the same amount of skepticism.
Mm.
So yeah, what you said was not negative at all.
Mhm.
We're just seeing it as an interpretation to consider.
Right.
And in the same way, in like with Jacob's question about the hierarchy,
Mhm.
that just like we have five senses, like we have four archetypes, that they're all interpretations. Each one is a level of consciousness, so to speak. To
Right.
one compares the other. One different gives us a frame, a method of comparison.
Mhm.
Not as a spiritual path.
Yeah.
That's the confusion to say I'm in the path of the warrior, I'm in the path of the lover. That
Mhm.
it's just basically a lens. That these are each, instead of look this this. They said something about a crystal pyramid. Some guy kept a crystal pyramid on his desk.
Okay.
In one of the chapters. So the crystal, each one of those, if you look at it as a crystal pyramid,
Sure.
okay, each side is a lens
Mhm.
that has a different focus.
Right.
So we have quad focus lenses. Instead of bifocals, we can have a quad focus lens that we can use.
Yeah. Very well said. Thank you. And David, as I was rereading this chapter, I was thinking of a new possible process for guts, a dialogue chairs, so to speak, with each of the four archetypes informing where we are. So maybe I or someone else should write something like that. I think it would be very interesting to hear and different perspectives being parsed out. And so just wanted to mention that. Well, let's go back to lover and finish up on that area where Stavros brought up on intuition and that sixth sense. So this chapter ends up going in a direction which is comfortable to Jungians, but may not feel comfortable to others, comfortable to people who are in tune with that. But perhaps if you have skepticism to a sixth sense or anything that's non-sensory, then perhaps it would be objectionable. So they discuss various forms of premonitions. They parallel the creative artistic expressions with the psychic. So this is the realm of that which is deeply felt. And as they say, psychic energy too is deeply felt. So on page 129, going back, the following full two paragraphs. The last paragraph on 129, rather.
In a similar way?
In a similar way, yeah. Would you read that, Stavros?
Okay. In a similar way, genuine psychics also live in a world of sensations and vibrations, of deeply felt intuitions. Their conscious awareness, like that of the artist, is extraordinarily open to invasion from other people's thoughts and feelings and from the murky realm of the collective unconscious. They seem to move in a world behind or underneath the world of daylight common sense. From this hidden world, they receive often in the form of almost audible words, gusts of strong feelings, unaccounted for smells, sensations of heat and cold, not accessible to others, images of great horror and beauty and clues about what is really going on with people. They may even receive impressions from the future. All those men who are successfully reading cards, tea leaves, and palms are accessing the lover, who binds all things together under the surface, who even binds the future with the present.
Yeah, the next two paragraphs too, they're
Okay.
short.
Okay. The businessman who has hunches is also accessing the lover. So are we all when we have premonitions and intuitions about people, situations, or our own future. In those moments, the underlying unity of things is revealed to us, even in mundane ways. We are drawn into the lover energy, which connects us with realities of which we are not normally aware. Any artistic or creative endeavor, and almost every profession, from farming to stockbroking, from house painting to computer software designing, is drawing upon the energies of the lover for creativity.
Yeah. I mean, imagine the stockbroker not using some kind of internal sense to buy and trade and sell and all that sort of thing. So in what ways are you in touch with areas of intuition and hunches and in that sixth sense sort of realm? Or are you not?
Daniel?
Yeah.
I immediately thought when I meet someone, I don't know, I have this sense about, and I could, I guess, be proved wrong, about somebody's character, like a good human being. There's
Mhm.
just this sense. I don't know what it is. It's like, I don't know. It's just like when I meet somebody and start speaking with them and interact with them, there's just this sense that I pick up about their character. Are they a good, kind human being? You know, it's just something I pick up. It's not about their words, or it's just their, I don't know.
Mhm.
I suppose I'd be proved wrong, but yeah, I don't know. That's that sense I have, you know?
Yeah. And sometimes those are prejudices,
Yeah.
but a lot of times that is your gut saying whether you'll resonate with someone or not. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example of, you know, some time when that happens quite a bit. Yeah. So maybe I should ask the question, are you in touch with areas of intuition and hunches? Or is this a realm where you're kind of iffy on? You know, a few years ago, my skeptical, scientific-based, humanistic mind would have said, no, you know, I don't know that I'm in touch with anything that's nonsense, that can't be proven, you know. But now I think I might be okay with that. Yeah.
I'm having some difficulty with that last part.
Okay.
And we talk about intuition.
Mm.
But I think we need, for me, I need to go, what is the source of that intuition?
Okay.
And because intuition to me is another form for magical thinking. You know, I mean, because I mean, there's been a hijacking of spirituality, you know, and so, you know, and so I think the bottom line to all of this, I mean, the bottom line to love is unity.
Mm.
We're a community. We have common unity as a community. So the intuition, I think that, you know, I just hate the idea of the stockbroker and, you know, having intuition. I mean, this thing like that. I mean, Donald Trump has intuition of his next business move to make. You know, what is the source of the intuition? if it, I mean, I think the parameter to look at this at is just, is the intuition, is the source of intuition, love, the lover, which is energized by love.
Mm-hmm.
So, so I just want to, be the curb this whole, language of intuition, because I have a reaction to it, as you might hear.
Yeah, I mean, so the next thing we're going to talk about briefly, though, is the shadow side of lover. And as I mentioned before, what happens when the shadow side of lover interacts with the warrior? I would say we end up with things like mass shootings.
Mm-hmm.
And massacres and manifest destiny and the Crusades, where we hunt down Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
And or I should say Christians hunted down Muslims.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The Inquisition, the Conquest, you name it. Historically, humans can think they're operating from a place of love for themselves, not realizing that they're actually in shadow mode, as lover and shadow mode of warrior, perhaps.
Well, I mean, I think in terms of the shadow level of each archetype, and the fully realized one, the fact that the shadow has two polarities to it, and that the mature is a single point,
right?
It's all about separation and unity.
Unification, yeah,
and unity. That's really, those are the two things that really define it all. I mean, does this create this level of consciousness? Does it make us behave as separate, or this level of consciousness make us behave as separate?
Right.
As unified, rather, as separate.
Yeah.
Like, that's how I see it. David, you going to say something?
I was going to say that the warrior, an exaggerated warrior, which it sounds like Daniel was speaking about, when the lover is either under expressed or overexpressed. The attack on another person without regard to their feelings and their rights and so forth, that's only possible where there's an overpowered warrior and there's no recollection that there's another real human being there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's that smell of napalm in the morning, where the warrior is over exaggerated, and so is the lover. There is a sensuousness that comes with the exercise of power. Exercising power feels good.
Mm-hmm.
And so that overpowered warrior that can become dangerous almost requires a collusion with a lover that's either too little or too much. Seems. So it seems.
Yes, extremes are never good.
Yeah, right. And so here we are at the shadow lover, and I think David has spelled out for us the addicted lover, one who is in overpowered mode, and an impotent lover, one who has an underexpressed, underdeveloped sense of lover, and realizing that we are being recorded right now. Maybe we can talk about each of those two in isolation. So let's read the beginning of the new section on page 131 and ending with, "And the nighttime stars he depicted." 131. Wait a second. Oh yeah, I'll read that. A man living in either pole of the lover's shadow, like a man living in any of the shadow forms of the masculine energies, is possessed by the very energy that could be a source of life and well-being for him, if accessed appropriately. As long as he is possessed by the shadow lover, however, the energy works to his destruction and to the destruction of others around him. The most forceful and urgent question a man identified with the addicted lover asks is, why should I put any limits on my sensual and sexual experience of this vast world, a world that holds unending pleasures for me, like napalm in the morning? How does the addict possess a man, the primary and most deeply disturbing characteristic of the shadow lover as addict in his lostness, which shows up in a number of ways. A man possessed by the shadow lover becomes literally lost in an ocean of the senses, not just in sunsets or in reverie. The slightest impressions from the outer world are enough to pull him off center. He gets drawn into the loneliness of a train whistle in the night, into the emotional devastation of a fight at the office, into the blandishments of the woman he encounters on the streets. Pulled first one way and then another, he is not the master of his own fate. He becomes the victim of his own sensitivity. He becomes enmeshed in the world of sights, sounds, smells, and tactile sensations. We can think here of the painter Van Gogh, who got lost in his paint and canvases and in the violent dynamism of the nighttime stars he depicted. So the danger of the addicted lover is that it is an internally and perhaps externally destructive force. And the destructiveness stems from obsession, perhaps not love itself, perhaps an illusion that it is love, but in fact it's not. So in 131, the last incomplete paragraph beginning, what happens when we are caught? Would someone like to read that? Just to lay out the next, and then we'll talk about these two shadow lover. So 133, the very bottom where it says, what happens when we are caught?
What happens when we are caught in the fires of love, roasting in the agony and ecstasy of our own longing? It is that we are unable to disincarnate or step back or to act. We are unable to, as we say, come to ourselves. We are unable to detach and gain distance from our feelings. Many are the lives that are ruined because people cannot extricate themselves from destructive marriages and relationships. However, we feel ourselves caught in an addictive relationship. We had better be aware, because the chances are very good that we become victims of the shadow lover.
And the next paragraph too, which is very important.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to say, there's no place to end. In his lostness, within and without, the victim of the active pole of the shadow lover is eternally restless. This is the man who is always searching for something. He doesn't know what he's looking for, but he is the cowboy at the end of the movie, riding off alone into the sunset, seeking some other excitement, some other adventure, unable to settle down. He is insatiable. He has an insatiable hunger to experience some vague something that is just over the next hill. He is compelled to extend the frontiers, not of knowledge, for that would be liberating for him, but of sensuality, no matter what the cost to the mortal man who badly needs, as all mortal men do, merely human happiness. This is James Bond and Indiana Jones, loving and leaving to love again and leave again.
Yeah. So everybody has moments of malaise and boredom such that we seek the next thrill. But what Moore and Gillette point to here is the pattern of and propensity to always seek whatever is over the next hill, never to be satisfied with our lives.
I
And so
wanted
that's
to share something.
sure.
It's picking up on what Stavros said earlier, that I've heard that from certain spiritual teachers who've experienced this, that what they say is that the heart chakra sort of powers all the other ones. And so what is causing the shadow lover, what's causing someone to go from their center to the poles? Is it just lack of awareness? Is it, I think it's fear that if I'm an addict, I'm afraid if I don't get this hit right now, I'll never be happy, or I'll never get the love I think I want. And it's living in one's heart that is able to bring anyone, not just in the lover category, but any of the quadrants, to the center. So if you look at the pyramids on page 19, that if you're the king and you're living in your heart, you can kind of stand tall, stand upright, but otherwise you fall into the trap of becoming a tyrant or a weakling. And same thing with the lover, is the addict is one who believes if I don't get this hit right now, it's the fear, like I might never feel good ever again.
So my response would be, and others can chime in if they want to, the challenge of this book is to bring us to our heart for lover, our minds, to live in our minds too as magician, to live in our right action in warrior, and to live in the fullness of blessing, the king. Think of that, going back to that, the gift, the story of Iron John, and the integration I felt, at least at the very end of that, when I heard it for the very first time, and every time I hear it after that, the adventurer brings along all of these companions and ends up a unified self with living in heart and head and right practice and right blessing. So that would be my response, and hopefully that wasn't too circular, but sorry if it was.
I would say actually, Jacob, that what Moore talks about as the thing which keeps one in able to harness the power of the lover is awareness of the other two poles. It's what you were speaking about originally when you asked the question. Yeah, it's being conscious of the power of the lover and the need for the lover, both. What the lover can accomplish and how it can enrich our lives, and when too much is too much. It's lack of awareness that allows us to live in the overexpressed or underexpressed side, in the addict or the ascetic.
Yeah. When you led our I know we're very short on time, so I'll make this incredibly brief. That when you led the staff training that I was on a few months ago, I had that realization that it must be living in the heart, and that's what our processes are all about, is becoming aware of the shadow that's keeping us on the poles.
Cool.
And that was an intuition that I had, that we're running out of time and Daniel wants me to wrap up.
You're really good at feeling energy. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry that the conclusion is at the end of the book. Because the conclusion should be the opening chapter. Because
that's interesting.
And it's really too bad we don't have another 90 minutes, because the conclusion chapter is worthy of 90 minutes in itself.
I agree. I completely agree. We should have some kind of sum up.
Yeah, because I think that, we've been talking about each archetype individually. We've been talking about each leg of the table, and we have not talked about the platform.
Okay. You want to do that?
Yes,
I
100%.
want to meet one more time because
Yeah.
this is very incomplete for me. And,
Okay.
And I really moved to republish this book and re-edit it and put the concluding chapter at the front.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So for next week, David, Michael, and I will be on a NWTA, but maybe the week following. Well, no, that doesn't give me much time to work on this. Maybe, yeah, let's shoot for the week following to do a conclusion,
the 28th
discussion. Yeah. Thank you, David, for that comment. Can I say that publicly? Yeah, he says, let's see, what does he say? He says, I smell an archetypes study group forming, which is very possible and very true. Yeah, I'd be happy to write more. I do have this extension now, so yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay.
I just want to briefly talk about, I've alluded to, what happens if a man is possessed by warrior energies, and he is cut off from lover energies in an impotent sort of way, and the thought that I had is, it could range from sociopathic tendencies to being a cold-blooded murder, and that's maybe, this whole connection between, I hate to, I think this whole mental illness thing is a red herring, is in terms of gun control. But I think where this stems from is perhaps an intuition that, serious damage can happen when we are out of our faculties in whatever way, so I think, going back to the previous chapter on the king, where I talked about the reptilian brain and when we are reactive, there's no way to legislate how we stop being reactive to things, I mean, if we could, then there would be no fatalities as a result of what's it called, road rage, or so forth, or possibly, going postal, as they used to say, which now is, more descriptive of school shootings and so forth. So that was just a rhetorical thought, and I do want to close now. Does anyone have any concluding thoughts? We will reconvene in a couple weeks, I think. If not 2 weeks, then 3. Then, does anyone have any closing thoughts on the lover?
Well, the one thing we cannot get enough of is love. And the one thing we cannot give enough of is love.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what Marianne Williamson, who you probably listen to all the time, says. She says that people go to the therapist's office and ask, I'm not getting enough out of my relationship. I'm not getting enough from my partner. And she says, well, what I say to them is, are you giving enough?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Just to clarify, Marianne Williamson quotes the same source that I quote, A Course in Miracles.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not her that that I listen to, but it's the Course in Miracles.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, on that note, I just wanted to close by saying, at the beginning of this study, we were entering the tomb, a time to rebuild, a time to, go into chrysalis formation, a time to, how caterpillars become liquid and then they emerge as beautiful butterflies or moths or whatever. What we have done here is something similar, where we've taken apart different aspects of ourselves, talked about different aspects of human nature and how it might relate to us. And we have reintegrated ourselves, and we emerge from the tomb in a rebirth or a reawakening to a mature masculine. And as we go forth from this place, may we be renewed. And until we meet again in a couple weeks, I'll put out an announcement that we're going to meet again. And thank you all for your participation. I really appreciate your help in helping me understand better and finding different cracks of my own thought where you've filled those in nicely. So I appreciate it. All right, I'm going to stop recording now.